Welcome to Adding Fuel to the Hire, a podcast for hiring managers and job seekers across all types of dealerships. With over 20 years collective recruitment experience, Rowan, Tony and Phil draw upon their knowledge to help you navigate through the recruitment and job hunt process. For more information, head to our website, addingfueltothehire.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Adding Fuel to the Hire. I am the host, Tony, today, and with me is Phil.
Hey, Tony, how you going?
I'm good. Look, today's a topic that is definitely not in my domain, but it's definitely something that you're all about. It's psychometric testing.
Yeah, that's right.
So those viewers that have missed previous episodes, we've talked about our past. Phil, well, actually, I'll let you introduce yourself and why this topic is, I suppose, of interest for you.
Look, long story short, I did a psychology degree, 4 years of my life learning a little bit about this. Spent quite a bit of time doing psychometric testing as well. Part of the degree was, I think we did an entire course actually creating psychometric tests, learning how to make them and learning what they're all about and how you essentially create them and what the statistics behind it is and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I suppose first and foremost, and I'll be, I suppose, forthright in saying that I won't have much to give in this episode, but I'm sure you'll lead the way. But what is the idea behind psychometric testing? Why are they becoming more and more popular?
Yeah, look, they are pretty popular. A lot of people are using them these days. A psychometric test can range from anything from a general ability test to cognitive skills tests to behavioral tests to full assessment centers, which take a day, sometimes even 2 or 3, to profiling to personality traits. So their primary purpose is very misunderstood. A lot of people use them for decision making. It's actually more so meant to be used as a supporting tool more than anything else. And that was pushed as well. You know, when I was studying it, they sort of said, look, never, ever, ever base your decision off of this.
Yep.
This is really just there as a supporting tool. Really, you're not meant to use it for much more than that.
Yeah. We've had clients in the past that will do them as the first step of the recruitment process and I suppose screen candidates based on their results. So what you're saying is, you know, don't do that basically. It's not the first step.
Yeah, it's a dangerous thing. So look, many people see psychometric testing as I suppose a window into the mind of the individual.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not the case. That's not how that works. The test really just shows that this person happened to return this score on this day in this test at this particular time. So there's a lot of statistics to it and there's a lot of ins and outs to them all. But the general idea is that research has shown that if you're, for example, in a sales role, you've got to be, you know, very extroverted and very chatty and all that sort of stuff. And research has shown that the best salesmen have these and these and these sort of traits.
Yeah.
And the idea is, look, if we give this to every applicant who's going for a sales role, then if we just employ the people who are the absolute best on this test in these particular domains, then we've got the best people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not quite true. It doesn't quite work like that. There's too many other conflicting factors that play a role there, unfortunately. But people really want to recruit for those sort of people a lot of the time. And it makes sense, you know, from I suppose, just generally speaking, it seems logical.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's too many other conflicting factors that play a role.
Yeah, and I've heard we've had examples of it where a company will have, say, one really good sales consultant and they'll get them to do a psychometric test, see their results, and then use that as a guide moving forward. Well, you know, Jimmy works really well. These are Jimmy's results. Let's apply this to everyone that, you know, applies for a job in the future. If they don't fall within this set of what Jimmy has given us, then they're going to be no good. I obviously don't know enough about this, but I would assume you'd have to have, you know, far more, like any science experiment, a far greater scope of people being tested to begin with to actually find what an average looks like.
Yeah, that's right. So you need a fairly large sample size usually. Look, off the top of my head, I think it's 200 plus or something like that for these psychometric tests.
Yeah.
I remember when we started doing them, we started with about 500 questions and started to narrow them down from there. And they went across a cohort of about 600 people that answered them.
Right.
So look, the testing is fairly rigorous, but all the result really says is that your result is similar to that of one individual or two individuals that did this test who had these particular traits.
Yeah. And I remember when we were preparing for this episode, you mentioned something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you had a passing comment about how they're really good for, or they're obviously been developed in the past to figure out who has serial killer tendencies or sociopaths and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Can you touch on why they are effective for that, but not necessarily for what we're talking about?
So psychometric tests are a very broad topic. They cover personality tests in particular as well.
Yep.
If you talk about sociopathy, it's a personality disorder.
Yeah.
And so you would give a person a personality test to essentially figure out if they fit within the range of that of a sociopath. Basically. So that's what it's really good for. A lot of the time, these tests originally developed from psychopathology, and then organizational psychology developed after that. And people figured out that these sort of traits are actually common in normal people. There's ways for us to test them. Let's give these people a test and see if we can figure out if certain people have certain traits. Do they do better on certain things?
Yeah, right.
It's kind of like if you imagine, I don't remember what it was, on a Nintendo DS. You had those. It was a Japanese game by a Japanese doctor. It was like a mind game of sorts. And
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, and it was the idea was if you just do this for 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, you'll get much smarter.
Yeah. It was all about brain training.
Yeah, brain training. That was it. Yeah, and your IQ would increase by so and so and so much.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that didn't work because it doesn't carry over. It's only specific to the task that you're given. And psychometric tests can be the same. So if you're giving someone a numeracy test, and you just say, this is a few equations, and you say, he's a technician, he should be fairly technical, he should be able to do it, and then he does really poorly. Well, if you actually gave him a truck or something to work on, and he had to work something out, which is a physical problem, he might do really, really well.
Yeah.
The problem is that this one particular result doesn't necessarily carry over, and it's not respective of their entire lives and their entire skill set.
Yeah, and we've seen examples of that where technical-based roles were failing psychometric assessments due to a mathematical issue. Yeah. And when pressed, it was discovered that there was no maths required for the role whatsoever. It was just more so the mentality of what you said, they perform bad in the maths, so they're going to be not that great, and we'll just move forward from there. But yeah, it's got to be applicable. I know we've talked about it briefly in the past, but it's got to be applicable to the job at hand and relevant, really, the actual skills. But how... For someone like me, and I'm sure many listeners that are completely ignorant to these, can you run through how they're made in the first place?
Yeah, so often it starts off obviously with some sort of trait you want to test. It usually actually starts off at the very initial stage from another psychometric test, where they say, all right, this test isn't really giving us enough of this. We want to test more of that in this particular test.
Yep.
And they're generally made by psychologists to measure a particular skill. Personality or an ability, whatever it may be. It just depends on the whatever psychometric test you're trying to improve, because that's usually where the research is at now. Most things have been tested, and so now it's a lot of it is about improving and making them better.
Yep.
Generally speaking, they go through fairly rigorous testing. So obviously the majority of psychometric tests are question-based. As I said, the one I did, I think we came up with about 600 questions.
Yeah, right.
And then I think we narrowed it down to about 150 maybe or something like that.
Yeah.
You give that test to a cohort of, as many people as you really can. Ideally, you want to have 200, 300 people plus if you can, particularly when the questions, when there are so many questions, because there's obviously then question fatigue and all that sort of stuff you need to think about. And from there, you essentially start to narrow down and see there's a lot of statistical analysis you need to do. But essentially you start to narrow things down from there in terms of, okay, well, this question is pretty much not giving us anything. This question is pretty much the same as this other question, so we can eliminate one of them. And you sort of start to go from there. It's quite hard to make them.
Yeah.
It takes a couple of months up to a few years to really make them. The main thing around psychometric tests is always that they're A, reliable, so they give a reliable result, and B, they're valid, which means they give a valid result. So that basically just means that say you want to test IQ, it's really testing IQ and it's not testing extroversion, or it's just testing mathematical ability or something.
Yeah, right.
So those are the two things you really need to worry about. Again, it takes quite a long time and they are fairly rigorous, but they're not perfect. A lot of people like to say that with statistics, a statistic doesn't mean anything to a single person, and that can often be the case. And again, if you're asking someone to answer 150 to 200 questions, by the end of it, they might just be over it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, especially with attention spans and how they're going, in 2020 and beyond.
Yeah,
it's going to be one of those things that I'm sure a lot of people would sit down and do a test and taper off horrendously towards the back end of it.
That's right. Yeah, and it leads us into sort of some of the issues we've seen with psychometric tests in the real world, and obviously that I've sort of come across myself.
Can I just, without knowing anything, and like I feel personally like one of the major issues with this would be the fact that result is, that candidate or that applicant's answers to a particular test at a particular time and a particular day. The way humans are, we can fluctuate quite massively. And yes, consistency is always key for anyone in any element of their life. But, if someone's having a bad day, an applicant comes in and you say, yep, we want to flick you a psychometric testing, see how you go. They go home, something, personal to them's happened. They've got time restraints. It's got to be done that night. And, their daughter's struggling at school or something like that. And their mind's elsewhere. I feel like that result's not necessarily going to be reflective of them as a person, because it's just reflective of their, them answering the questions at that time.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's not based on knowledge or anything. It's really just based on you and the way you think. So, and the way you think can be totally different from, even on the same day, from the morning to the afternoon. Another big one people tend to do is they like to think about, okay, what are they wanting to know? What are they asking here? They try to figure out the question. They try to figure out, because everyone looks at psychometric tests as when you do them.
Yeah.
People tend to get a bit nervous and go,
what are they trying to figure out?
They're trying to figure out.
Yeah.
People try to beat the system, so to speak. And so they try and think about, okay, what is it wanting from me out of this question, and how can I best answer it to get the best result, rather than just answering the way they think. Yeah,
and I've experienced that before. I worked at a previous company and we all did a psychometric test, and we wanted to see where, if our good performers were, replicated on this test. And by far our worst employee, who actually got let go not too long after this, because they were literally on their last legs. There was so many problems with them. They were the best performer by a country mile. Yeah. And it was quite clear it was because they answered what they thought was the right answer as opposed to what they actually felt. And I know that a good psychometric test is made so that is harder to achieve, but people can still do it. And we found a trend where most of the people that we all knew were the high performers, they brought most money in for the company, everyone got along with them, they'd been there for a long time, performed worse than not necessarily everyone else, but a lot worse than you would think. And when we spoke to the lady that had done the testing for us, she basically said it's this phenomenon where people that have been there for a longer period of time, they feel more stable and therefore they're going to give more honest answers.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of other people were, nervous or, as you said, worried about what does this actually mean? Are they trying to get rid of me? And so they tried so hard to answer the right questions that they actually managed to do that because it wasn't the best of tests. Whereas people that were there for 5-10 years were so comfortable, they were like, oh, I can answer this truthfully.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I've heard that from a few people who've been in similar situations who, did an amazing job at their employer. They'd been there for a couple of years. They knew they were doing a good job and they knew they were safe. And they got a psychometric test and they did really, really poorly. And apparently they were totally unsuitable for their role according to the test.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon. That definitely happens.
And it's that element of, test nervous. A lot of people just don't perform well in tests, regardless of what the test is. And so you don't want to discourage, good candidates just because of that.
That's right. Yeah. A lot of people just don't like the test. And, the other thing to keep in mind, day to day, then you're not testing them, on a day-to-day basis. You're not being tested by your employer, generally speaking. You don't go in and get asked 20 questions about your math skills.
Yeah.
That's generally not how it works. So just something to keep in mind as well when you're choosing these psychometric tests.
Yeah. So I suppose now we're a little bit more aware of the issues and things to look out for in order to avoid. But in practicality, they do still serve a purpose. We're definitely not saying by any means don't use them, but in your, actually professional opinion, what would you say is the correct way to actually use these, or where do they fit into the whole process?
So the first thing to keep in mind is do not use them purely as a decision-making tool.
Yeah.
There are some serious legal implications for you potentially if you do.
Yeah.
I can't quite remember who it was. I remember there was a business in the US, I believe it was an IT business. They were going into administration and they basically said, look, we're going to have to let quite a few people go. I think it was like 40 or 60% of the workforce or something. And they didn't know how to do it. So they basically just gave everyone a personality test.
Yeah.
And they said, do this personality test. And whoever did the worst in terms of their skills on this personality test got let go. And they got sued afterwards, and they lost it quite badly. Yeah. So just something to keep in mind. Just saying, oh, you did bad on the psychometric testing, so we can't give you the job. There can be some legal implications there.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, the best way to do it is to use them as a supporting tool. I would not use them until you have spoken to a candidate face to face, simply because I think you're kind of. It's tough for a candidate to get involved into a psychometric test before they've even met you, and they've even had a proper conversation with you. I think that's the best time to use them. I would maybe use them towards the end of the process, and I would only really use them if you feel the need to use it. I wouldn't use them generally just as we always do psychometric tests, so let's do a psychometric test.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've definitely had this instance as well where a client was super happy with the candidate. They're definitely keen to move ahead. We just got to do a psychometric test because, we just do psychometric tests. And then they did really poorly and suddenly that was the end.
Yeah. And 3 or 4 people had met this candidate. They really liked him, but it was just black and white. Anyone that doesn't, give the results we want to see in this test, then we're not going to put on, which,
that's it.
Yeah, a lot of the time people will go against a psychometric test and they'll point to when the candidate falls over for whatever reason, whether it's in 1 year or 5 years, and go, oh, see, we should have known, look at the psych test. But I think that's the wrong attitude to have, because there'll be so many people that you miss out on by having that attitude.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And in terms of the tests that I would generally recommend, I would say always try and use behavioral tests. So they are more so they're behavioral based scenario tests. They don't measure IQ or anything like that. IQ is, by the way, for anyone who's interested, is not a predictor of success in life. Hard work is.
Yeah.
For anyone who's interested in that, and always do behavioral tests. Say you're looking to bring on a parts interpreter. You've got 4 candidates that are all great. You can't split them. The best thing to do is to get each of them in to the dealership and say, right, this phone's going to ring and you're going to have a customer there, and we just want to see how you go. Yeah. And you give them, a good customer, a difficult customer, and an easy customer.
Yeah.
Like that. And those 3 customers are all your employees. They're all part of the team. You've briefed them on how they're sort of meant to act on the phone. And depending on how those people perform in those situations, you can then get a pretty good idea of who's the best for the job.
Yeah, exactly. You're seeing exactly that role play out in front of you in a real world situation, which I know I've done in the past. It gives you a lot more confidence than just a piece of paper giving you a report that you're not too sure what the results mean. I know assessment centers are definitely one of my favorite things for hiring people, and definitely the way I would go moving forward.
Yeah, that's right. And look, assessment centers, they're great, particularly if you have quite a lot of people. Look, if you only have 2 people, then there's probably no point in doing a 3-day assessment center. But if you've got over 100 applicants or something, say you're recruiting for an apprenticeship program and you've had lots of applicants, they're a great way to sort of narrow down the group. And implementing those behavioral tests is a great way to get an idea of, obviously they've not worked for you in the past, so you're not expecting them to have product knowledge or anything like that. But you get that intuitive behavior from them in terms of, okay, if they are presented with a situation that's foreign to them in the job, this is how they're probably going to react.
Yeah, exactly. Well, That's all we've got time for today. I know I've definitely learnt something new that I didn't know before. So hopefully, if you're listening at home or at work, you've learned something as well. But thanks for giving us that expert advice, Phil, and we'll be back again next week.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Adding Fuel to the Hire. If you have any questions or you'd like to hear us talk about a particular topic, why not send us an email at podcast@addingfueltothehire.com. If you like what we do and would like to support our podcast, please leave a review on your podcasting app of choice. For further information, please visit our website, addingfueltothehire.com.